We are live at the 7th Annual MSS Phoenix Forum, and we are talking SOC of the future. It's a futurology panel insofar as we're looking at the future, what we want, what we expect, what we think. Always a great way to do it. Our panel is very kindly moderated by Chris Ichelson, CEO of 360 SOC. On our panel, we have, representing the world of healthcare, Chris Lawrence, CISO at A Healthcare Confidential, Mike Manrod, CISO at GCE, representing education, and Brian Gibbs, IT Manager, NXU Energy, representing energy. Chris, what are we going to be talking about now?
Well, today we're going to talk about the SOC of the future, break down some of these acronyms, talk about response, and then hear out kind of what this looks like going on to 25, 26, and 27 as we flow down that path with regulation or without.
Perfect. Well, you have the floor. Futurology is all yours.
Cool. So definitely appreciate you guys, Mike, Chris, Brian. Thank you again for joining me today on the panel. I know your guys' time is valuable, so much appreciated. But my first question today, and I think it's one of those ones that if you were sitting around at the dinner table and it was all your IT peers or security peers, or whether, you know, you're kind of on the journey for improving what you're doing inside the cybersecurity department. And we run into these terms like MDR and SOC as a service and XDR and all these, you know, buzzwords, yet alphabet soup. And I kind of wanted to hear from you guys, really what you guys see as the difference, or is there a difference between MDR and SOC as a service, or is it one and the same? So I guess I'll start with Mike and hear kind of what your thoughts there on that is.
Yeah, you know, it's back to the prior panel, you know, there's a lot of buzzwords flying around, right? And I mean, I think, you know, I'll pull off of some of Rich's comments. If we boil it down to the fundamental need, we can see where all these things fit, right? A SOC is an overarching construct of everything you need to triage and respond to and manage the inflow of events across your entire infrastructure. That could be cloud, on-prem, it could be network-based events, web app-based events. When we zoom out, MDR is basically endpoint protection with somebody looking at it, which also can be a very valuable supplement. But I think there's an element to not having the illusion of buying MDR and thinking you have a SOC. They're both valuable, but they're very different. And then obviously XDR is sort of like MDR's attempt to take that a step further, but obviously very, very limited in scope still. It's not a SOC, but it takes it maybe one step further than MDR. What do you all think?
Chris, do you agree with that too as well? Or do you feel that maybe the EDR vendors that now have MDR maybe just hijacked the term and stole it from the SOC vendors that used to be MDR? What's that look like for you?
I think it really depends on the company and their infrastructure, right? And majority of the companies that we're talking about are going to likely be mid-sized to enterprise. And so they're going to have some type of infrastructure and resources that they're responsible for outside of just those endpoints. And so it's not going to be a complete solution. And so you're going to really need to be able to have that SOC side to be more of that holistic approach, you know, to be able to, if you can, ideally be able to bring in as many of those key valuable resources with the, you know, log information to be able to respond and act, because I think that's really what what we need to see as a point of, you know, yes, these are different, and how, you know, where are they the right fit? Are they always an overlay, or is that something, you know, that's sometimes potentially separate depending on the level of expertise and maturity of that SOC, whether that's an in-house or a third party.
And Brian, for you, do you see the same in that there is truly a difference between the MDR and SOC, MDR being more point solution, SOC being more over-encompassing or overarching? And when you do think about that, then what ultimately then is the requirement of the SOC versus what is the minimum or the requirement of the MDR? I'll expand upon that with you a little bit.
I think you're on mute, Brian.
Yeah, every time. No, I agree with Mike and Chris. You know, it really depends on environment that you're in, how noisy it is. Some of these SOCs get really noisy, and you have to use different approaches to make sure that you're not just chasing ghosts within the system. And looking in my industry right now, we're looking at upstream and downstream information all the time. So we're trying to protect personal equipment on top of in the private sector stuff. So making sure that we have the right tools to look at what's coming at us in real time is really important.
Cool. And then Mike, how about you? What do you see as the value of the SOC of the future then? I mean, especially if we're going to split this off and we're going to say the point solutions stay where the point solutions live, and SOC then becomes the overarching or over encompassing, offering that either you're going to build in-house or you're going to outsource. And what's that look like then for you for the future of the SOC? And what are those requirements that you'd be looking for, especially sitting in your shoes?
Well, a few things. So one, dwell time is dropping. Tool evasion is going up. Efficiency and effectiveness of the attack platforms of our adversaries, especially within the ransomware as a service ecosystem, are elevating and ratcheting up each quarter. And response capability in general, I think a decade ago, it was very much hey, we checked the box and maybe we'll need it one day capability, to now you can point to either you're on the news and have a ransom note, or you had a near miss. And the difference between those two things is whether your SOC was in the game and whether they detected it. You had good detection engineering, good response, shut it down, stopped the bad day. And how many of those bad days can you stop or contain? To me, the SOC of the future will be all about that, right? So, and I mean, I think that goes also to what Kevin put in chat, right? Of if you have, say, XDR in this gray area, and it doesn't have your AppSec, like your application logs, your WAF logs, all these things that say vendor-centric across one strata that can't possibly cover everything. There's going to be blind spots that attackers can thread their way through. Again, it doesn't mean don't buy it, just have something in addition. The other thing is, I think for the mid-market and enterprise, there's obviously varying degrees of SOC that makes sense to outsource. But I also think there's a rising trend of people realizing they've got to have an in-house person as well. So maybe you have an MSSP that's applying, X times 10 resources. Well, maybe you need at least X times 1 or X times 2 to work with that SOC and be their boots on the ground to carry out and interface with to make it effective. So I think the SOC of the future is going to be moving towards true effectiveness rather than checking the box that we have it, moving towards being able to do better and better with stopping adversaries during shorter and shorter dwell times, and being able to map to frameworks like MITRE ATT&CK to really intercept toll gates along a kill chain to prevent compromise.
I think, Mike, I got to second that. I'm, especially seeing in my shoes at 360 SOC. I mean, that's one thing I harp on with the customers. Like, it's all great that you buy all these services, but if you don't know what to do with the information we present you, or you're not willing to ask for help, then you might as well have not even monitored it altogether, right? It did nothing for you, right? And I think that's a huge value statement that you talk about there of, kind of recognizing that, outsource augmenting still requires you to have some sort of internal responsibility or a liaison, somebody to go quarterback or carry that football on, right? So Chris, talking a little bit more about what Mike mentioned there and talking dwell time. I've been asking this question to executives all around the country over the last 4 months, ever since it was brought to my attention. And as we see the shift, especially talking about what Mike's talking about, whether it's automating response or components of it, and inevitably kind of drawing down that ultimate response time. But is 32 minutes for a security operations center, is that too long? Understanding that all of us run multi-tiered approaches to escalations, right? It comes into the SOC. Somebody's got to review it. Once it's reviewed, somebody also then has to escalate it up. That person needs to review it. And then ultimately moving to build an escalation that goes to the customer. is 32 minutes too long? So I'd love to hear what you think there, Chris.
Yeah, I mean, I would say definitely 32 minutes is a challenge, and in most cases, it can be too long, right? Because when we're looking at this, a lot of times that dwell time is something that typically these environments are still identifying that dwell time. They go back and you identify, okay, it looks like this was the initial date. However, you still need to stay open-minded in case there was something potentially before that, depending on what you had found. And so, so with that dwell time is real, and 30 minutes, unfortunately, is too much, right? I mean, even with the dial-up modem, it's too much, because if you look at the upload speed, majority of our offices or infrastructure is going to have at least a gig, if not 10 gig of upload capability to the internet. You get that out to a mega NZ, or you get that out somewhere like that, within minutes, gigs of data is gone. Right. So, so from that perspective, they really only need, about a minute of time to be able to get a gig or more out. And usually a gig or more is too much. Right. So anything is too much, really, especially when it's that sensitive data. So I think that, being in tune, and like what Mike has indicated, whether if you're going to choose to use a third party, you absolutely still need to have a SME in-house that has accountability, that has responsibility, that helps make sure that partnership has more of an intimacy to it. And sure, 80% of the environments can have a similar approach, but there's probably at least a 20% perspective that is unique to that environment. You need to go through and have some, just more intimate and thorough review, and as well as, keeping on the foundations, just like what Rich Phillips said. It doesn't have to be the shiny objects.
So Brian, taking what Chris has mentioned in there a little bit further, if 32 minutes is too long, but also not everybody's going to adopt the automation component and allow you to do this in real time, what is the happy medium then? Is there a happy medium? And you're on mute.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, it's a hard question. The happy medium, I mean, depends on the industry and what information, as Mike was just saying, the playbook of what they're trying to accomplish. Yeah, 30 minutes is way too long. There's so much information that could be in there. There's so many different paths that they could take. There's so many different ways that they can embed themselves to stay there longer, even after you've identified them. I think really, in some aspects, the happy medium could be more along the lines of how fast you identify the information and get it to the customer. So if you're waiting 32 minutes before the customer even knows that something's going on, that could be a very large effect on what's going on. But then sometimes if you give them too much information too soon, they could overreact and take matters into their own hands and things like that, and cause even more issues. Yeah, that's a hard question. I know it's something that, in the IT infrastructure, we deal with that all the time, of, putting those key things in place with a customer to make sure that, they understand the ramifications of not doing those automations and not providing the information in a timely manner. So yeah, it's hard to gauge that happy medium, but I think notifications, making sure the systems that you're using are being proactive, also letting the customers know, like, that there are threats, which threats, what's updated, making sure that they're getting, whether that's on a newsletter or something that they get every day, like, hey, here's the threats that we're looking at, these are the things that we're seeing, so that the way the customer can be more proactive on their side too. They see something that's out of the norm, they know where to contact and things like that. So I think the happy medium is working in tandem between the customer and that SOC that's monitoring the systems.
And Chris, if I can share as well, I think
go ahead.
When you were putting that in context to Brian, that a lot of customers don't allow the automations, right, from a security perspective. And I think that if somebody has chose to not allow any of those, that is the first wrong step. You've likely chose the wrong platform, or you're just in a state of fear. I think you have to look at enabling automations to help us mitigate this so we can be down to milliseconds instead of minutes and months of dwell time or potential entry points, right? And so I think that is key. And yes, there's the side of human on the loop, and there's the side of being able to weigh that and balance that. But ultimately, the goal would be to continue to drive those automations and work to increase those automations, because unfortunately, we can't do it at that human level. It needs to be at the network and the endpoint level, multiple points to be able to terminate communication and be able to, ideally mitigate the attack.
Agree. So I guess, Mike, let's take that a little bit further then. So does that not mean, based on what Chris and Brian are saying, now let's take out of the fact that it takes an average organization over 200 days to detect a threat anyways. Let's take that out of play. So if we take that out of play and we go with what we're talking about in the chat today, are we not saying that autonomous SOC is at tier 1 and tier 2 and tier 3 level is inevitable? It's no way organizations can go without it in the future, because you do have to just err to the safe side, because inevitably, possibly insurance might not cover this, or there could be another compounded correlation, which could affect the organization at that point. What do you think of that?
Well, I'll take that. It's a good question. I'll take that by maybe backing up one step. I think it depends on the scenario a lot. If you ask, is 32 minutes enough? If somebody finds an exposed S3 bucket, to Chris's point, and is going to download all the data in it, 32 minutes isn't enough, but 1 to 2 minutes may not be enough. And at that point, you're just probably not going to stop it. Like, you're just going to fail in that scenario. So setting aside that to the scenarios that we can actually impact, like somebody sends malware to a user who opens that, they infect a system, they look at what network context they're in, they find an exploitable flaw, they move to other systems, they take over your domain or an admin tool, they send out ransomware. Now that's gotten lightning quick, but it still usually is taking several hours, often even days. So I think organizations that respond in 32 minutes, I think that's pivotal compared to organizations that don't respond, or that respond in hours or days or weeks. So I don't think we want perfection to be the enemy of good. If everybody in the United States got to a flawless response initiated within 32 minutes of the very first alert of an attack, I think that would actually cut down dramatically on breaches. That said, sometimes 32 minutes isn't fast enough. Sometimes automation can catch things people can't. And a great example of a really low risk automation use case is pulling emails out of inboxes when it went to 1,000 users, and it's found out 10 minutes after delivery that one of them was bad and they're all the same. Right? Like, you shouldn't wait for a human to analyze that. Automation's really, really good at that use case. The flip side is, I wouldn't want every antivirus alert to automatically quarantine a host. Imagine if your CFO or CEO is doing a press release or earnings call and you auto contain them with 10 million viewers live. That's probably 100%. Not the best. So I think we need to apply automation, but I think we need to apply automation intelligently and realistically, thinking through the overall business picture.
I agree with that. Brian or Chris, anything you'd like to add to that?
I can tell you, I've had auto containment enabled for all of my CEO's board meetings. I'm not afraid of it. I'm perfectly fine with it. I've enabled it for years, and I've been able to gain trust and some level of faith in it. And I've went with vendors that have been able to prove that value and prove the minimized business impact. So from my perspective, I think that I could have stayed in that state of fear of the tool doing too much and taking things down years ago, but I chose not to. I chose to enable it, test it, of course, in a test environment, but then that progressed to production. And
so like if a browser extension makes a malicious DNS lookup for an ad in the web page, it just auto contains? Or like, what's the threshold you set that at, Chris? Because I'm curious.
No, yeah, I mean, it's going to be more of a multiple layer side and have to have multiple things. It's not going to be an initial a potential event.
Yeah,
right?
I'd be curious if you have it out on GitHub or something. I'd be curious the logical flow that got you to that confidence level, and I'd love to look at the formula and try to replicate it.
Definitely, and we can definitely talk more offline because it's more using some of the commercial vendors to help do that, to where I don't have something direct on GitHub from a code perspective, but could potentially look at it just from a logic shared perspective.
Cool. Thanks. Yeah, I'd love to take that out of band. Thanks, Chris.
Absolutely.
So let's add on to this question a little bit. So Brian, if you're then the CEO and you're anti-automation and your user gets phished, it happens to be your CFO. And when he gets phished, then he goes and sends 5,000 emails out. Do you now enable the automation? And do you not care if you yourself get then shut out in a board meeting at that point? Does that shift the scope?
I think it does.
Okay.
Again, it depends on the CEO too. I've worked with many that it didn't affect them. They want to work within that bubble. And so and they don't want to be restricted. So yeah, I think it does shift that a little bit. But you have to show the practical case of it most of the time. You could sit here and tell them all day long, like, these are the things you need to do until they see it, they don't react. And so some of those take a little bit longer for them to pivot and make sure that those automations are on. And then most of the time, once they're on, they just feel safer and better. And as an IT professional, you have to just keep bringing those things to them, like, hey, this system is working. Here's what we're seeing. Here's what we're stopping. Here's what we're protecting.
Got it. Good. These are good, all great conversation points. And I think there's some good value there. So we're talking a lot about what this SOC can do, right? And I think as the MSPs and the MSSPs that are in the community are starting to listen to this and say, okay, well, maybe my SOC can do that. Maybe I could be automated. Maybe X, Y, Z. But do you guys think that when you look at the SOC of the future, do you think that the SOC of the future focuses on just the SOC and the tools they deliver? Or do you feel that the SOC of the future inevitably is going to be more security team as a service? And having that platform inevitably is a plus if you have it and if it's adaptable to any organization. How do you feel about that, Mike? I know you guys have your own SOC and you service the whole university and others in the community. And I mean, what are you guys thinking when it comes to that? Or is there just still too large of a skill set gap to house those granular skill sets at a higher level and then scale it?
Yeah, it's a really good question, Chris. And I think some of it depends upon vertical. The needs are very different depending. On one hand, we look out at a lot of SMB, just getting them anything, just getting them MDR would be amazing and would stop a lot of problems they have. And XDR would be fantastic and they need it. Then you move up to the mid-market where the adversaries have been leveling up. I think it comes down to breaking down what you need to protect into a service catalog and just making sure all those things are covered based upon your MSP and your internal efforts. So, all right, these are the pieces we're handling. These are the pieces they're handling. We've tested, we've validated, we've purple teamed, we've pen tested. They all flow together well. Then I think as you level up to the higher level, like the true upper end of enterprise space, the really large enterprises, and work towards that pinnacle, I think that model continues, but the service provider engagements I see at that level are very different, right? What you can tailor as a service to be affordable at the mid-market is not appealing to an organization with hundreds of internal people on the security team, but they often still need services. So that then becomes much more tailored. Like I know of MSPs doing engagements for companies I've gotten a close look at where there's hundreds of people on the engagements and 30 or 40 of them boots on the ground physically in that company's building. And it's follow the sun and there's a lot engaged. And that makes sense, but I as a university could never afford that model, for example. What's everybody else think?
How about you, Chris? What do you think of that?
Yeah, I mean, I think it is a challenge to be able to truly build your own and follow the sun, do the 24/7. Whether you're truly having a global follow the sun or just within your Americas. But I think that going through for most companies and finding a balance of a third party to help with the 24/7 coverage, depending on their size, right? Might make sense. And as you start to get to Mike's size and larger, a lot of times that does make sense to bring more in-house. And I think that still having some outside consultancy to try to make sure that you're still staying apprised of some of the most adept and staying in the right direction is key. But seeing some of the physical security being brought in, I think we're only going to see that once we start to get to more global entities or entities that have something of higher value to protect, right? Whether that's IP or something of that nature. But ultimately, I think driving the data-centric security as part of that SOC of the future is going to really be part of that key and be more pivotal to it than just saying, let's make sure that we're adding physical security. And yes, these other things to make it more holistic and bring it under one umbrella. I think that that's still key to funnel that in. However, enabling a security guard to, be an extension of the first line is probably something that we'll see over the next 5 to 10 years, but not necessarily with the current security guards that we have on staff, right? I think that typically we've seen some of the challenges with the knowledge gaps on some of those personnel.
How about you, Brian?
Yeah, I mean, I agree. It all really depends on the industry. You have companies that have a single IT person that's trying to maintain these massive systems and the budget. So, the virtual SOC makes sense because you're not putting it all on one person to maintain and monitor 24/7. So, it does make sense in those environments. And then as that, environment scales, then that's when you start bringing those people in-house and you're doing a little bit more there. And then also, again, environments, everything. So some environments, CEOs and board members, things like that, if you're in those environments, don't want external, systems monitoring their stuff because of, IP and security and things like that. They're not fundamentally understanding of that. They're not looking at data, so there's that scare factor that happens too in some of those environments. But I think in the future, it's going to be really dependent on, funds, the backing of the industries and stuff like that. And a lot of the security platforms are changing, and the landscape is too, just in looking at, publicly trading companies, now they have to follow SEC guidelines and things like that. So a lot of that stuff changes how those SOCs are going to operate.
Do you guys think that the SOC in the end will not facilitate or house individuals that don't have a minimum of X experience? You're going to start seeing junior security roles then end up being 5 years of experience just to get a junior role. And how does that play into the SOC, and how do you scale if that is the direction of the skill set? And Mike, maybe that's more a question for you. You guys are the educators on that side, and you guys do a better job than I ever come across your students. So, how are you guys facilitating that? And then how does that play into the SOC of the future? Or do the service providers inevitably work to automate those individuals out until they do have that skill set? And maybe that is 5 years. What's that look like?
It's a good and tough question, and parts of it, I don't know if we know because we haven't seen it play out yet. And we've had great work with getting people up to speed quickly, but I think the training programs, not just traditional education, but each org's training programs have to do a lot to make that more and more effective as the expectations get higher and higher. The other thing, though, is I think playbooks, there's a lot of automation features that I'm uncomfortable without a person having a set of eyes on, of like, wait a minute, does this make sense? And I think sometimes you can have an analyst with 1 year of experience that may not understand the deepest technical levels of everything they're seeing, but they have a playbook, they're a human, you've instilled them with values your automation won't have imbued, and they can at least know when to escalate to that 5 year person. So you have 10 of those 1-year people that escalate to one 5 to 10-year person, but they're all empowered by automation and scaling more effectively. I think that's at least one speculative guess at how it might look in the future.
So one of the things in our training program for our juniors, and Mike, you might know this because there's a lot of the students come through, but we are big on them learning how to audit automation. If you can learn how to audit the automation, you can become more valuable quicker, 20 weeks instead of 52 weeks, right? Chris, are you seeing that in your guys' practice too? Do you guys hire the younger folks into the SOC side? And I mean, and how are you leveraging them? And also, like, what are you guys seeing for a training program? Let's say I'm saying it's 20 weeks and that's somewhere around 800 hours, right? Isn't that 20 weeks, 800 hours, right? 40 hours a week, so what does that look like for you guys? And how are you seeing that shift? And are you also hiring from the local colleges too as well?
Yeah. I think talent is an aspect of it, but it's really that person's passion, right? So from my perspective, typically if they aren't doing labs at home, then they don't have passion. I just basically keep it simple at that. If they're not doing it outside of work, they're not really passionate about it. And that's what I've found to be the item that really drives a person being successful, right? And so if that's something that they're doing on their own, then it's usually going to prove to be successful here. And from our perspective, what we like to do is we have a quarterly focus on an area of technology that we feel is a gap, and we drive that for that quarter.
Mm-hmm.
And then we do reflective training to allow the teammates to suggest and do their own training back to each other as well on the peer-to-peer side.
That's good.
So yeah, so we really look at trying to have each other sharpen each other's the sword's edge, and it even if it's a tenure, it doesn't mean that it's just tenures presenting, right? It could be somebody that's brand new that just has something that they feel is valuable. And so we really look at trying to sharpen each other. And like Mike said, I see as well that we're going to have the entry level escalating to the seniors. And as somebody indicated here as well, and I've been staying apprised of it, is enabling an AI assistant on the security side specifically for the triage of the events. Yeah. And just to really help manage the noise, right? And I think that when that's done from a seasoned perspective, that can be done right, because you just start to work on little chunks, or the biggest noise at a time, and reduce that. And ideally, depending on if you're using a commercial vendor for that, ideally they've went through a lot of that already. So now you're just going to be looking at things that are unique to your environment. And so I think that that it is key to have experience, but it's more key to have that passion. And I'm perfectly fine with hiring somebody that's new. It's more about that passion.
All right, so let's take that passion a little bit further, and let's hit the 800-pound gorilla with this one. All right, I'm a father, single father. I got 2 kids. I got soccer. I got life. I don't got a mother for my kids. And I got more passion than anybody, but I don't got time to sit at home and play with home labs. I got a life and kids that I got to feed. How do I overcome that then? If that is going to be that 1 to 5 year stretch, and it is driven, and employers are looking for that guy that wants to be the pen tester and all that. And just so you guys know, I hire 100% opposite of all that, because I don't want that person, because they'll never stay in that role. But for me, I get this question a lot. I don't have the time outside of my 45-hour work week, assuming they give you an extra 5 plus lunches, 50-hour work week, to put in that extra time in order to get there. So is that the employer's responsibility, or is that candidate not hireable? Brian, what do you think of that? And sorry to hit you with that one, but that's a big one. I hear it all the time.
Well, I'm not a single father, but I have 4 kids. I put in probably 60 to 80 hours a week. And so, yeah, I mean, that passion in some ways has to really push through those barriers, whether that's, 5-10 minutes a day, whether that's, listening to audio tapes on the way home from work, things like that. Like, that's what I do. If I find something that I am passionate about, I want to learn more about, I listen to SEC guidelines and stuff like that on the way home, just because that's the only time I have that availability. And then, even on some of those, there are online labs that you can take that, work in those skill sets to where it's, it is 10-15 minutes. That's 10-15 minutes after kids go to bed, and you can go and do that before you go to bed. So there's the passion's got to be there. The employer has to understand that situation, and that you may not come up as fast as everybody else, but you are putting forth that effort.
You're hitting the marks.
Yeah, you're hitting all those marks. You're hitting everything you need to do. You may be a little behind because you don't have all that extra time that, a single person can spend, 10 hours a day in their lab playing around with. But there are ways to do it. You just got to be willing to find those little niches in time and space that you can incorporate it. And you can do things like I do. I actually create labs for my kids to play with. So that way I'm teaching them a little bit, but also learning as we go along. So make it more of a family effort. It goes a long way.
Definitely. And how about you, Chris? I mean, or Mike, or Mike maybe jump in on this one, then we'll finish it up with Chris, since we're kind of running here to the top of the time. But Mike, you're sitting in the educator spot. How do you coach that individual? How do you mentor that individual? And then how do you get them to understand that, like, when the kids go to sleep, we pop the book open for a bit, or we study for that next exam. We invest in ourselves. What's that look like then?
So part of it, and I actually had this conversation with a group of students a week ago asking a similar question, and Rich and others put it in chat as well, kind of, but I think it comes down to having realistic conversations, but also having multi-tiered learning of, like, hey, you told me you want to be like this chief architect sitting in that chair over there in 10 years. This won't get you there. Like, you're going to have to be doing stuff for 3 hours after you go to bed each night for a while, and you can balance it and make it fun, but it's what most of us here in this panel had to probably do. It's probably what you have to do too. But I do believe there's a place for everyone. So when I'm coaching somebody who has the genuine values, the genuine interest, shows potential, not everybody has to be that rock star, right? We need people who do a good job and who can do more basic things too, consistently over a long time. And as long as those people have realistic expectations, like, hey, this level of effort is going to get you here. If you want to be an Olympic athlete, that's what this looks like. If you want to play for a varsity team, here's what that looks like. If you want to be barely passable when we all go play pickup games at the park, like me with my basketball, and you miss more shots than you make, that's okay. You can still play, but have those realistic expectations. So I think, but then also coming up with learning pathways, like, hey, if you're valuable to invest in, but you're not going to aim for that top tier, here's a series of lessons tailored to that to get you valuable and sustainable in those entry-level jobs.
Good answer, Mike. 100% agree. And Chris, let's go ahead and wrap this up with you for the final answer today. And again, you guys, thank you so much for the time today. I do really appreciate it. And Chris, why don't you close this out? Give us the blockbuster. I'm 5 years. I'm single dad, single mom. What do I need to do to win? Talk to me.
I'm going to just call it as it is. I'm going to claim that those are excuses, right? Just like kind of like what Brian was saying. And it's based on where our passion is. What do we really want to do, right? I mean, I spend my time a little bit everywhere, and I still have to balance it. I don't have excuses, right? If I want to have a little hobbyist doing stock trading in the middle of all this, it's hard, but I can do it 2 a.m. to 6 a.m., right? There's always a way to be able to do whatever you want to do. And so I think that it just shows where their priorities are. And of course, priorities should be self and family. And with that self, there's a lot of investing into to build and do what I want to do for my family. So from my perspective, I definitely, I have those conversations with my family as well. Hey, I'm going to have this upcoming season. I'm going to be spending more time on this, and this is why. And we just have those real talks. And it's part of sharing with them. I want them to invest their time properly. And so definitely it's something that even right now I'm looking at how can I improve what we're doing with our training. I just had this discussion with one of our senior members yesterday and asked for their input as well as we try to go through and propose this to the team and then get their feedback, right? And so I think that it's stay humble, expect to always improve, always learn, and you know, the whole point of us being able to get together is to share these ideas and sharpen swords, ideally.
Totally. Well, thank you guys so much. Thank you so much for the opportunity. This is great chat today. And definitely you guys, if you're come across my office off 16th Street in Lincoln, feel free to stop by anytime you guys want to grab lunch. Definitely appreciate it. And Phelim, I'll hand it back to you.
Awesome,
Perfect.
thanks.
Well, thanks very much, Chris, for such an engaging panel. Thanks for all of the wonderful comments in the audience. I can see Mike and Elio and well, actually loads of other people. I can't list them all, but thanks for commenting and getting involved. And thanks, John. So Mike, Chris, Brian, and Chris, thank you very much for such a great panel. Let's give you a big virtual round of applause, and I look forward to seeing you in the audience. See you soon.
Bye-bye.
And thank you very much to the 360 SOC for supporting this event and many others. It's great to spice up the formats as well.